Please welcome to the stage, Ling Kent.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for getting up early and being with us this morning. We have a great panel lined up for you. I'm Ling Kent with NBC News in the Business and Technology Unit, and we are so glad to be here. First, I'd like to introduce Chris Urmson. He is the co-founder and CEO of Aurora. And I'd also like to introduce Malcolm Gladwell. He's a staff writer at The New Yorker, host of the podcast Revisionist History, and executive producer of the documentary Autonomy. So thank you guys for being here. Just a quick note for the audience. We're going to open it up to questions for all of you. So please go to slido.com and enter the hashtag South by Southwest, and you can see it right there. And you want to search the room that we are currently in. But just to kick it off, we're here to talk about self-driving cars and autonomous driving and AI today. But I want to roll back and go back to the original genesis, if you will, your cars. What are you guys currently driving? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so today I drive a Audi A5 Cabriolet. So when I used to work at Google, and I bike to work every day. And when I left, my wife said, you cannot go have job interviews showing up on your bicycle, so get a car. We live in California, and so figured get a convertible, and it's a lot of fun.
Malcolm?
Well, I'm a car nut, so it's a complicated question, but my favorite car is I have a 2003 BMW M5, the last of the, this will be relevant later, the last of the great analog sports sedans. I'm in the dinosaur camp.
Excellent. Some fans out there too. I think the reason I ask you is because you're both steeped in this world of self-driving technology. And I want to know, driving your Cabriolet and your M5, as you look into self-driving and you deal with it so often, what is your favorite little feature about self-driving technology right now? Be it a feature in a self-driving car or the technology more broadly speaking?
So first, self-driving cars don't really exist today, right? We're developing it. The technology's not in market yet. There's a lot of work to be done. But having spent a lot of time in them, for me, it's the not having to worry about the mundane part of driving, right? I've driven my Cabriolet. I'm not really a car guy, but I had this vehicle, got it, started driving down the 280, which is this beautiful bit of road in Northern California, and it was like fall, and the light was just perfect in the evening. I had my music going, and driving down the road, I'm like, I get it. I had that moment. It wasn't full analog, but it was like, this is why people love driving. And then I got to San Francisco. I was like, the fog rolls in, the traffic stops, people are yelling, and I'm like, this is why we need self-driving cars. So.
Malcolm, what about you? What is the thing that gets you excited about self-driving technology?
I'm not sure I am excited. I mean, I understand its merits and why we might want it as a society, but do I want it? No, I actually really like driving. Yeah. I mean,
have you experienced the self-driving features in a car? What's your gut reaction to it?
The closest I've come is, and Chris, you can correct me. Is it level? Would be the entry level one that you can get on a. I drove someone drove me around in a Mercedes,
yep.
Which had, I guess, is it level 1?
Yeah, it depends. So level 1 means it does one thing. It'll either slow you down if you're going too fast, or it'll kind of help keep you.
But we drove with.
Okay, so it's
hands
probably
off
level
the wheel,
2.
and then it started to beep and make all kinds of noises. But I didn't find the experience particularly pleasurable, I have to say.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in an elevator that was making unpleasant noises.
It's just scary on the road, right? It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. But this is not to say I'm opposed to the technology, but it's just not for me.
No, and it makes sense, right? Those features are there to support the driver. And the reason why they make kind of the annoying elevator noises is because people very quickly forget that it's not actually driving, right? They're kind of like, oh, well, I let go of my hands off the wheel, and it didn't kill me in the first 10 seconds, so I can trust it. Yeah. And so they need to have this beeping and binging so that you remember, oh, no, I'm supposed to be driving. Because an awful lot of people don't enjoy driving as much as you do. They want to do something else. They want to talk on their phone, or they want to, check whatever came in on their email, and that's not really driving at that point.
Yeah.
There is a safety element to it. There's been, obviously, there's millions of car deaths every year globally. And in the US, it's 40,000 deaths alone. And so more than, 2 million people are injured. So as you think about the safety side of it, Malcolm, and what the possibilities are, maybe once humans get a little bit more used to it, to these features, do you think that it's smart to continue moving? I mean, we are moving very much. It's hard to stop the inertia, but for the sake of safety.
Oh, yeah, no. I think the technology is inevitable and socially welcome. I just happen to be unhappy with the notion of and I'm also a little bit dubious that we will be able to, that cars with human drivers will be able to happily coexist with autonomous vehicles. Although I always object to the term autonomous vehicles because a self-driving car is not autonomous. A car driven by a human is autonomous. A self-driving car is a car that is linked into a system. It's the opposite of autonomous.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, right? If you have an autonomous car, one day in the morning, it's like, I don't feel like going today, right? What you really want is an automated car, right?
It has real artificial intelligence.
We're really talking about unautonomous cars. But I'm a little bit worried that people like me, who are a tiny fraction and irrelevant to this conversation, but that we're going to get dealt out of the driving equation. That there'll come a point where, am I right, Chris, that it's a lot easier to design a system where every car is self-driving as opposed to a system where we're mixing human drivers and...
Absolutely. It would be dramatically easier if we could snap our fingers and say, no more cars on the road, driven by people.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's real. Right, I think that there are people who love driving. I think the vast majority of people don't love commuting, but there's no reason to worry about that happening anytime soon. That being.
You're not encouraging me at the moment. There's no reason to worry about that happening anytime soon. It's not the ringing endorsement of traditional driving I wanted to hear.
And I think that's kind of my Canadian understatement, right? When I say anytime soon, right, I can't see infinitely far into the future. People love their cars, and I think that there's parts of driving that it makes a ton of sense to automate, to have self-driving vehicles serve. I think moving through urban centers. So I use the statistic that 30% of the traffic in San Francisco is people looking for parking. So that's not people enjoying driving, right? That's people cursing the fact that they can't find somewhere to stop driving. What I heard is in Paris, it's 80% of traffic is people looking for parking. So imagine you get to Paris, you drive your beautiful M3, M5, you stop kind of outside where you've enjoyed the vineyards, and then you get into
but wait a second,
transit.
why is that? Sorry, this is sort of interesting.
Okay.
Why is that particular problem alleviated by an autonomous vehicle? By a self-driving vehicle?
Well, because if a bunch of it is people looking for parking, they can stop, hop out, and go and serve the next.
Are you implying then that finding parking spots will be automated because the cars can see them and see what's open?
So
I'm saying they don't actually have to park; they have to stop, and then they can go
just
off and
keep
serve the
going.
next person.
But you've now made a second leap, which is an interesting one. You're assuming that the optimal system with self-driving cars is one where we no longer own the car. The car is a kind of taxi.
I do actually believe that's the way it's going to enter.
So
the market, for sure.
it's even worse.
Oh no!
So now not only can I not drive my
making
car,
you feel better.
but I can't even own my car.
No,
because you're actually quite right. This is a point that I think is often forgotten, and that is if we go to self-owned self-driving cars, the problem of traffic gets worse, not better. Way worse, right?
Yeah.
So if my car is self-driving and I don't have to look for a parking space. The car drops me off, and I just send the car around the block in infinite loops until I'm...
Or worse
someone
yet,
else could use it,
you send it out
You
for
share
ice
it.
cream, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So I can imagine we clearly see an increase in traffic with Uber, right? Well, what unless you went to the model you're talking about, where cars are essentially taxis, then the traffic problem created by self-driving cars is infinitely worse than what we have now. If you can imagine a
Infinitely
traffic
so.
problem being worse than we have now,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, in the short term, you're right, this is quite what the task you are engaged in is quite a radical transformation of urban life in America.
Yeah, and I think we're already trending that way, right? So I fully agree that the right way for this technology to come to market is in serving people in cities as a transportation service. And I think that what we've seen is people are actually pretty happy with that. If you look at New York City, where urbanization, in America kind of is at its highest, the right answer there is mass transit and mobility services, so taxis, yellow cabs. And I think the same is going to happen as it's kind of inevitable, right, in cities that we can't, it's not sustainable to have one person in a giant 2-ton vehicle driving down the road. So the right way is, how do we serve those people best? How do we serve the community best? That doesn't mean you don't get to enjoy your car, because again, maybe you're like, I would argue that anyone who enjoys driving on the 101 at rush hour probably should be evaluated. And so let's take that painful part away,
Yeah.
right? And let's enjoy driving on the weekend. Let's enjoy driving for fun, right? Where you can really, because even driving your beautiful analog car, that can't be fun in stop and go traffic. Or maybe it is. I'm sorry.
It just still has its pleasures. They're
The
smaller. But
Smaller, okay.
The other question that kind of jumps out from that is, how do you regulate and police, and for safety reasons or for traffic reasons, a human driver mixed with a self-driving car? And how self-driving is that car? I mean, in your opinion, should they be subjected to the same rules? I mean, we've seen some pretty significant bad news around self-driving technology. The fatality a year ago in Tempe, Arizona, with the Uber vehicle striking a person who was walking their bike. And that was recently decided that it would not be criminal charges against Uber.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
how do you, yeah, I mean, how do you?
So I think the promise of this technology is that opportunity to have vehicles that are safer than human driving, right? And that's, we're not there yet. We're still building the technology, but that's where we're going to get to. And I think what's incredibly exciting about it is that people really don't pay for the safety features in their car today. So if you have a choice between paying $1,500 for forward collision mitigation braking or $1,500 for like a better stereo, invariably people choose the better stereo because it's something you get to enjoy every day. The other thing, works once on a bad day. And so with self-driving technology, because the value is not directly to the consumer, the safety, it's the fact that they don't have to spend that time driving, that they can use it for other things, that they can relax. The safety comes along underneath that, and then as a society, we benefit from that. So I think it's a really interesting model to kind of get that into the marketplace.
What do you think, Malcolm? I mean, in terms of looking at how society is governed and how law enforcement works, when you're mixing technology, I mean, there's certainly side effects and there's certainly consequences here, right?
Well, it's a very interesting question. It does seem to me absolutely clear, and Chris would know that you would have a much better sense of this than me, but it's absolutely clear that we can make a huge dent in that 40,000 lives lost on the road a year number if we move to widespread adoption of self-driving cars, right?
Yep.
I don't think there's any, but just as in the aviation industry, as we've increasingly automated the functions of an airplane, the number of plane crashes has dropped dramatically. Yep. There hasn't been a major plane crash in America for, I don't know how long now. I mean,
I think there's been one person died on a U.S. flight carrier in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So
I mean, so it's really, so that's on one, but at the same time, I think just as with plane crashes, it doesn't mean there's no plane crashes. What automation of driving an airplane means is we get a different kind of crash. It's less frequent, but it's more unexpected and potentially more catastrophic. right? With cars, the same thing is true. We'll have way less fatalities from ordinary activities on the road, but we are opening the door to a different kind of crash. So for example, if every car on the 101 is automated and somebody hacks in and creates a 200-car pileup, that seems to me a reasonable thing to worry about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is the general worry. And I would love for you to talk about this, Chris, but my general feeling about people from Silicon Valley is that they are a little bit too blasé about security problems with the internet. I listened to a presentation. I listened to a presentation recently with some guys working out of Silicon Valley who were working for DoD, and they were talking about the extraordinary promise of automating military vehicles, the kinds of vehicles that transport, say, nuclear-tipped missiles. And they didn't once mention the question of security. And I raised my hand at the end and I said, well, is there an increased possibility of somebody hacking into this vehicle that's carrying a nuclear-tipped? And they said, well, yes, there is. And they used this marvelous phrase that, yes, what we are introducing is, quote, multiple points of vulnerability, unquote. I'm sure you've heard that phrase. All I want is for people like you to use phrases openly, publicly, and freely, like multiple points of vulnerability, so we're prepared for that catastrophic crash on the 101 when it happens.
Yeah.
Right?
So first, I totally agree with trying to figure out how to not have nuclear-tipped weapons in self-driving cars, but we'll avoid that.
You can't dismiss that because
I don't dismiss it at all.
One of the
right? I think
major drivers of this technology are those kinds of uses. It is the DoD is hugely interested in this kind of thing, as are all kinds of commercial applications, right? So when we talk about the categories of risk we are introducing into the system, this ought to be front and center. It's not grandma going down the road. That's the...
So I agree with everything Malcolm said, right? That we have an incredible opportunity to impact the 40,000 lives that are killed on America's roads or lost on America's roads every year, right? 95% of those are due to human error. So we should be able to do better. And inevitably, we will introduce new failure modes, right? We will have accidents that now occur that would not have occurred because of a human driver behind the wheel. And as a society, we have to make that trade. In the same way, when we went from riding horses to cars, driving cars, we had a whole new set of injuries, right? We had much less of the kind of person being knocked off the horse by two ropes between trees, and we had more of high-speed impacts and injuries like that. Cybersecurity, internet security is fundamentally important, but this is not a self-driving car problem. Right, this is a connected world problem that we have to solve, and I think that I actually think that people in Silicon Valley take this pretty darn seriously. Right, there's a lot of things where I would agree that Silicon Valley kind of poo-poos some of the risks in the interest of advancement of things, but this is one of the areas where we
understatement of the year.
Yes, agreed.
Fair enough, but this is important, right? But it's the same problem that it's really a fleet inoculation problem. So vehicles today with humans behind the wheel are connected, and you've probably all read the examples of people sticking a CD in a Jeep, and then it's hacked. Honestly, I don't worry too much about that because if you want to do something bad to one person, there's easier ways than figuring out how to hack a DVD. But if all those Jeeps now are connected through the internet, even if there's just people driving them, and all the Jeeps in America let's not pick on Jeep, all of some brand of cars in America suddenly lock the brakes, that's a really bad day too. So yes, we have to think about cybersecurity. Yes, we have to think about how do we protect the fleet, because yes, we are introducing new and different vulnerabilities, but this is a fundamental societal problem, not a self-driving car problem alone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But the self-driving, the movement towards self-driving vehicles is taking place within a broader context in which cybersecurity is the great, it is the huge unanswered question at the heart of this move towards the Internet of Things, among other things, right? It's like, I mean, I would feel much better about this if I didn't wake up once a week to hear that some other company has had 2 million of its records hacked by some guy in Bulgaria.
Yep.
Right? So it's just not encouraging to be launching a massive social revolution at a time when fundamental questions of cybersecurity remain unanswered. That's just my...
And I think that one thing you have to realize is that when people put effort into developing technology, they put the effort in that's appropriate to the risk that's associated with it. So, my phone app that allows me to poke cows and have them say hello or whatever, right? Probably the risk of the cybersecurity risk associated with that is pretty low. And so people don't care about that as much. When it starts to get to my personal records, I think you're right. Some companies have been woefully underprepared and put insufficient effort into protecting them. I think there's other places, though, where if we look at security in bank machines, we look at security, honestly, I think Google does a pretty incredible job of cybersecurity. These are places where when people understand the stakes and are thoughtful about it, they're investing the effort and actually doing quite a good job about it.
Yeah.
How much is Aurora investing in cybersecurity? I mean, how do you differentiate yourself from the competitors out there? You are competing against Google now.
Yeah. So at this point, we don't differentiate on cybersecurity. So we're early in the development of the technology. We're not at a point where we're near fielding it. It is one of the things we think about. It's one of the things that's in the minds of our engineers as they're thinking about how do we how do we minimize those those newly introduced multiple points of vulnerability? But we're not at deployment phase yet.
Forgive me, I want to dwell on this for a moment because I really do think this is the core issue. Not one of the core issues. There are several, but it's
a hard problem. There are a variety of core issues.
I don't find convincing what you just said, that people devote attention to this relative to the risk, right? That we care about this relative to the potential risk of something going wrong. Didn't the NSA just get hacked by basically a kid working at a contractor? Somebody.
No.
Yeah, I mean Ed Snowden, who is working for Dell, who has minimal security. I mean, he has security clearance, but he's like one of a huge number of people who don't even know how he did it. He hacks into the crown jewels of the American intelligence establishment and gives them to we don't know who, puts them somewhere. You would think, so if the NSA can't protect itself, who can? Aren't they? Isn't that like as good as? Aren't they about as good and as motivated as anyone would be to have efficient and impregnable cybersecurity defenses? My point is that it strikes me that this problem is much deeper than you say. It's not that there is insufficient effort to being devoted towards cybersecurity. Maybe there is something fundamentally about many of these connected systems that make them indefensible. And that is not a reason not to move forward with things like, but it is a reason to pause and say, now, hold on. We're going to solve the problem of the 95% of ordinary accidents that have driver error. But let us be clear that at some point on the 405 at rush hour, there's going to be a 1,000 car pileup.
And how do we minimize the probability of that? Right.
How do we? Well, no. It's going to happen. How do we accept the fact that that is the price we're going to pay for? Right? I don't think anyone could stand here and say a catastrophic terrorist hack of is not going to happen, right? It's a very real possibility. If Ed Snowden can walk away with the crown jewels of the NSA, somebody can hack into.
So I actually think that I agree with the premise of what you're concerned about, right? I'm not downplaying that. I think the Ed Snowden data point though is a little off base, right? I don't think that's actually representative of the type of risk we're really worried about. Right? This is a person who was on the inside, who had access to the documents, and effectively downloaded them off the shared drive. Right? Is kind of my model of what happened.
I was going to the question of motivation. That here we have an organization that has extraordinary resources and extraordinary expertise, and was unable to protect itself against a lone dude at an offsite location who didn't even work for them. right?
Right,
So if
but-
they can't do it, who can?
But that wasn't the thing they were concerned about protecting, is kind of my model, right, to the same
Yeah.
degree, right? Like the technology that they're protecting is is their ability to intercept information of intelligence, enemy signals, and to kind of be able to move information privately within their networks. And so I think I'm not questioning the premise
Yeah.
of the reasoning. I just don't think that's necessarily the right example to point to for.
Well, there certainly
for
isn't
why.
a shortage of examples, is there? I can use other ones.
Let's pick a different one. Yeah.
No, the list is quite long at this point of people who have
Absolutely.
had their networks
Right.
proven vulnerable.
But I think Experian completely. Well, I'm not going to pass judgment.
No,
Yeah.
experience
Yeah.
seems to be quite
Seems pretty-
relevant here.
pretty
Frank.
bad.
Why don't you
Yes.
talk about it?
So I don't know the depth of it.
Yeah. Anyway, no, I'm
Yeah.
just, I obviously know a fraction of what you know about this, but I would like to, I'm the kind of person who needs to be convinced.
Absolutely.
And it worries me that I haven't been convinced yet.
Well, we haven't shipped yet. Give us a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So
In my experience, when you ship, it's too late to convince me.
my point is we should convince you before we ship. We haven't got there yet. But thank you. Yeah.
Well, beyond the security question, which is a huge one, there's also the artificial intelligence side of things and how it works and how it interacts with humans. And, what we're seeing is if you're a person with darker skin, you may be more likely than your white friends to get hit by a self-driving car. I mean, there's the pedestrian angle of this as well, which we've seen in the past couple of years has been equally relevant to whomever is operating inside the car. And that's according to a new study out of the Georgia Institute of Technology. Where do you think we are right now in terms of safety on the outside and making the artificial intelligence element? Because beyond the hacking and the security threat,
Yeah.
are these cars smart enough yet? Is the tech smart enough yet?
So first, no, it's not, right? That's why
Right.
we haven't shipped yet. So I just want to talk, the Georgia Tech study, like there's been some fairly exciting headlines around that. It's important to go a little bit deeper on that. So the research is certainly interesting, and it flags something we absolutely have to be cognizant of, right? Are there kind of biases being trained into the technology we're developing? Notably, the Georgia Tech study didn't actually evaluate any self-driving cars, right? They looked at some computer vision systems that have been developed by academic researchers. So it's, I think the hey, should we pay attention to this message of that is super relevant. I think deriving from that the conclusion that self-driving cars would be biased in this way is probably not fair. For Aurora, for example, we test in central Pittsburgh, we test in San Francisco, we test in Palo Alto, right? So part of the reason for that is to get a diversity of environments to gather data from, so that we can build the vehicles to be safe and to be able to react to the representative environments, and thus the representative people will be in those environments.
My follow-up on that is what happens, how much does it matter who works and designs the AI at your company, at other companies, to make sure that representation is understood and it's accurate?
Yeah.
And it's seen, people
Yeah.
seen.
No, and we try to make sure that like I said, we're testing a diversity of locations. We're quite cognizant of this as an issue, and we're putting effort into it. Yeah, it matters.
We have a bunch of audience questions. People are very eager to ask. Let's start with Kyle. As Chris said, many who have tried assistive cars trust them too much. Will we face a trust valley when they cause more accidents, and how do we reestablish trust? Malcolm? Chris?
Okay.
No one wants that one.
So I think this sounds like a Chris question. Excellent. So I think the first thing to recognize is that there's, and this gets lost because there's a lot of, there's obviously a lot of marketing speak out there, but there are really two distinct technologies that are related. So one is driver assistance. So these are technologies where you are still, as the person behind the wheel, responsible for the safety of the vehicle. This is like the stuff you tried in the Mercedes. And it's there to backstop you. And then, when it can. And what happens is in kind of the marketing cycles, sometimes that gets turned into a little more than an assist, right? It gets, gets labeled with names that are maybe confusing to the public. And then there's a whole other branch of technology that is the fully self-driving vehicle. This is the stuff that we're developing at Aurora. This is, where you ride in the vehicle, you don't have to drive it. And that, is generally more technology intensive, and the responsibility is being taken by the vehicle. And so, yes, I think there is a risk that because of the way communication is happening around this technology, people are bridging between the two and kind of mislabeling them. And so we need to be more clear about the distinctions and the expectations of the person in the vehicle around it.
What do you think, Malcolm?
I'm with him.
Yeah? Okay. Another good question here. It's an economics question. Will it come to money? Only the rich will be able, this comes from an anonymous questioner, only the rich will be able to have the pleasure to drive. And I'm going to add on something to that. Also, how will it impact the retail environment? So many trips that are taken right now are to run errands and to buy stuff. I mean, Malcolm, as you think ahead to what the implications could be on the economic side, what do you see?
Well, I guess the part, and I'm sure Chris agrees with me, the part of this that requires really careful thought and planning is what this means for traffic. So traffic is really it is the great limiting factor in urban America right now. We obviously waste way too much time getting places in and sitting in congested streets. Yeah. If it's not done right, this technology makes congestion worse, right? If it's done properly, it could radically improve congested highways. But that difference between getting it right and getting it wrong is not up to people like Chris. It's up to politicians and legislatures, and that's about rules and regulations. It's about setting up institutions and structures that push this technology in the right kind of pro-social direction. I don't have. I would quite happily welcome a world where this technology was structured in such a way as it helped to resolve problems of traffic and congestion. But I'm really, really worried that getting to that point is going to be much harder than we think. And in the meantime, we're going to have the Uber problem, which is, the introduction of Uber into Manhattan has made the traffic a nightmare. There's no doubt about that. It's made it worse, right?
It was a nightmare before.
Right?
No, it's worse.
It's worse, right? We statistically
I'm not doubting that it's worse. I'm just saying it was not good to begin with.
It was not good to begin with, but it has gotten, and that was because hopefully that's a transitional stage to where we figure out how to make.
Yeah.
But right now, what it has done is simply transferred people out of the mass transit system back onto the road. That's not what we wanted in Manhattan, right? So if we're not careful, we don't get what we want from these technologies, and that's to me the hard part.
Right, and I agree with almost everything you said, except I do think we, as the people developing the technology, have some responsibility to get this right. And our company, our mission is to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. And we very intentionally put that word in there because we recognize exactly what you're saying, right? There's ways that this can go wrong, and there's ways we can kind of not have the impact that so many people at our company are there to have. Yeah. And so we wanted to make that part of our mission.
What would be really fun is to try and figure out if you could wave a wand and you could set up the most optimal urban transportation system incorporating these ideas, what would it look like? So, for example, would you draw a circle around San Francisco and New York and all those places and say, if you're inside the circle, you can't own a vehicle, and everything on the road must be autonomous. In other words, and every vehicle that is autonomous must look the following way. It can't be this massive thing unless it's a commercial vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the most? Is that kind of highly prescriptive vision what the best way to make use of this technology?
So I think the first is I'm not qualified to say that.
Yeah.
right? Like, I need to, our team would need to engage with city planning and folks who really understand urban
thought
traffic
about
flows. So I think,
In a perfect world.
well, but again, I don't, my view of a perfect world is very different than everyone else's view of a perfect
But I
world.
want to know
right?
your,
So-
what
Yeah.
is your view of the perfect world?
So
Curious.
so I do think that I think public transit in America today is broken, right? I think if you look at LA, where I know the numbers, 90% of the cost of that transit is borne by subsidy. Only 10% is turnstile revenue, right? And we see that invariably bus routes are kind of gerrymandered, if you will, right? They're not necessarily optimal for service, they're optimal for some other necessary aesthetic criteria. Also, the density you have to receive, like some of these bus lines are running primarily empty off-peak hours. So what I see is a world where we bring automated vehicles to serve as part of public transit. Those vehicles are hailable, but they're multi-occupancy. So it goes A to B to C to C to B to A, where you're picking up people along the way, but the expectation is you're sharing them. And my expectation is that we'll be able to provide that at a per seat, per mile cost, where we don't need to subsidize it anymore, where we can actually run it
So
high
by
cost.
removing the driver, you change the economics so dramatically that you think you can remove the need for subsidies.
Yes, I think, and not in 5 years, but ultimately I think
Is
this
the
is
driver
where,
really that
I
expensive?
think
in
it's the,
overall.
so it's the passenger to driver ratio. So if you have a driver in a bus where it's moving 60 seats and the 60 seats are all occupied, no. But when you have a driver that, the only vehicle you have is a bus, and a bunch of the time it's being driven around with 3 people on it, it means you can't distribute the bus where where the 3 people really need to go. So I think there's I think the whole economics change.
Yeah, but can't we do everything you just said without a self-driving vehicle?
No, because I think the cost then per seat goes up dramatically.
Yeah. Well, that was my point. But
Yeah.
you said it doesn't go up dramatically if the bus is full.
Oh, no, sorry. Sorry. It's a combination of you need smaller vehicles, but because you need then more drivers, you need them to be automated to make the economics work.
This allows you
Yeah.
to have a greater number of smaller vehicles,
Yes.
which allows you to cover a much
Much more
effectively-
uniformly cover the area.
Yeah. Oh, I see. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, that's the way, yeah. Sorry, there's a chain of thoughts there that I
Yeah.
expressed poorly.
What are the odds we get that future?
So I actually am bullish on this because I think that the economics are going to push it in that direction. So again, the fear that what happens is we build a self-driving capability and we put in a car and then some rich people use it to order ice cream into their house, right? And that just creates a lot of traffic. Not that I have a problem with ice cream, but that creates a lot of bonus traffic. The components today, let's say it costs $10,000 to add to that vehicle. Well, not a whole lot of people are going to pay $10,000 for an add-on, whereas if you put $10,000 into a vehicle to drive it, suddenly that's an incredible economic benefit, and suddenly you can do all of these good things. So the technology will come to market first as transportation service, ride-hailing, in that vein. So.
Where do you think the drivers who have come to fill Ubers and Lyfts and make money and
Yes.
where will they go? What happens to drivers who use this as maybe not their main job or maybe their main job?
So I think the first part of the answer is that these services today are what they call supply limited. They don't have enough drivers. And so drivers are going to be here for a very long time. I think in the long term, this is, in the same scale of challenge that we face around cybersecurity, I think this is one of the next big social challenges we face, right? Is how do we move this pool of labor, these people who work hard and have these jobs, how do we move them into other jobs in society, and what are those other jobs? And this is definitely a problem that is substantially outside of my scope.
Yeah.
And it's not just about self-driving vehicles. It's
Right.
broadly across the economy. When you look back at this 100 years from now, after this transition's happened, people look at it and say, well, truck drivers, for example, which we haven't talked about yet, those were jobs that were not great for people. They ended up with low life expectancy. So wasn't it a wonderful thing that we brought this technology to bear? But for the people that are living that transition right now, it's a completely different story. And not now, but when the technology comes to market, how do we help those people move to to new jobs. I think that is something that's on us, and it's hard.
I've never understood why Uber is so enthusiastic about self-driving cars, since, as far as I can tell, they pay their drivers so little that they would barely save any money if they got rid of the driver. It's like a, every time I drive in an Uber, I ask the guy how much you're making,
Yeah.
and the number gets lower every time
Yeah.
I take a ride. So they're,
I'm not defending Uber's business model.
yeah.
Somebody else can do that.
No, I just wanted to make a point about Uber.
Did you say something else?
I was like, I'm not on the other side of this one.
No. It's just a, I would have thought there are other things they do to save more money than.
Chris, you were about to say something on that.
No, I think I can both agree with you that I would love people to make more money, and then at the same
Yeah.
time say that it's still a significant part of the cost structure.
Yeah.
The kind of the rough math that we've been at, we don't have inside looks at Uber's numbers, but in a car in America to kind of operate a car, it costs about 60 cents per mile. So this is like the depreciation on the vehicle, replacing the tires, fueling it, insurance, maintenance, all that good stuff. And then let's assume an Uber driver makes minimum wage. Mm-hmm. In California, that's $15 an hour. In San Francisco, average traffic speed's about 15 miles an hour. So they're making, $1 per mile is, napkin math. And so if instead of $1 per mile, you make that 10 cents a mile or 20 cents per mile to pay for the automation capability, there's the savings.
Yeah. I don't think it's clear. The one part of this that doesn't worry me is the job loss part. I think that you could make a scenario where it creates as many jobs as it, and also, like, I read a really interesting article on the question of automating long-haul trucking, and it's not that there's no person in the truck. There still has to be a person in the truck, because a lot of what you're doing involves a person. I mean, when you get to where you're going, you have to unload it. You have to check you've got to, if you watch trucks in any urban area, there's an incredible amount of time and attention and given to the loading and unloading and the checking and the dealing with the person you're delivering it to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it changes the nature of the work and creates a whole lot of new jobs, keeping these things running.
Excellent.
Since my experience with electronics is that they don't always work perfectly.
So you're in the pro self-driving car camp now.
No. Of the things I worry about, and there are many, this isn't one of them.
Great.
I don't think there's an employment problem here. That's
good. I do worry about it, but I also agree wholeheartedly with what you said, that a lot of what is kind of listed on the census as a truck driving job. There's a big chunk of that which is inventory management and customer relations, and there's all kinds of other stuff that they're doing that is value add beyond just getting the truck from A to B.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
One of the other value adds is time, potentially, for the passenger or the rider, whoever's in this car. And one of the questions from Mike here is, what do you think people will do with the added free time from having a self-driving car or not driving, basically?
Hopefully they listen to my podcast.
The next season coming soon.
So here, this is an interesting question. So the broader point raised by this is that once the time inside a vehicle is essentially yours, or at least you have more of the share of your attention when you're inside a car, then the price you pay for being in a car falls, right? So if I have to drive my car in rush hour traffic myself, my interest in being in rush hour traffic is very small, and I will presumably take steps to minimize it. If I'm in rush hour traffic but I'm watching a movie, then I'm less concerned about being in rush hour traffic. So this is one of these really interesting little perverse incentives that arises from self-driving cars, which is that I've now reduced the penalty for being in traffic. So if before, in order to avoid traffic, I commuted to work an hour and a half early, now I'm like, well, I don't know, my commute's a half an hour longer, but I can actually just work from my car, so I don't care. So this is what I was saying, this is one of those things we need to worry about. So everyone's like, all right, I'm gonna leave my house at 8:30, sleep in, see my kids off, and now my commute's 2 hours, but it's fine. It's just 2 hours in the office in the car. What does the 405 look like when that happens?
Apocalyptic.
But again, by your reasoning, who cares? Right? If you follow your, I think if your argument is logical, then it doesn't matter.
So your shining vision of the future is a whole bunch of vehicles moving at 5 miles an hour on the 405. No, it's fine.
No, I think that's yours.
And everyone's staring at their phones.
What I'm saying is that I think if your argument were logically sound, then it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
And so that means your argument, because it's clear that it would matter. And so I think that...
No, we've simply shifted the incentive structure. Now, the thing that you know better than I do is that traffic systems are extraordinarily sensitive to even the slightest change in inputs, right? Well, so if a traffic system that is kind of functioning now, you add even the smallest amount of extra traffic, you can make it a congealed mess. Now, my worry, I'm just saying, we're back on the subject of traffic, which is a big part of this, that absent some other intervention, this can make traffic worse, not better. So this scenario I've just sketched is avoided if we use this technology for ride sharing, as you described, right? But this is not a trivial point. This is a huge point, right? The existing model of I own my own vehicle and the vehicle is now self-driving, if that is allowed to persist, we have some very, very serious congestion problems.
Right. So agree. But let me throw a couple of points to that. So one is there will still be 24 hours in a day, no matter how good we are at the self-driving. And so, I don't think friction goes to zero, because it's hard for me to imagine that we're going to build vehicles that are so magical that you're like, oh, great, I'll get to spend 5 hours of my day today in this vehicle. You're still going to time shift, because whether you need to be in the office with people or whether it's that you would like to actually see your children, right? There will still be non-zero friction for that time. The other is that
you say the car should be engineered to be deliberately unpleasant, so we don't spend too much time in them.
I do enjoy this conversation. I think that no matter how pleasant you make it,
I've seen sketches of these cars. They're hilarious. They make it look like it looks nicer than my living room. It looks nicer than my living room.
Yes.
So I'm like, I don't know.
I've seen those too.
Looks. I don't know why I wouldn't want to spend an extra hour on the 405 in that thing. Got the movie going.
I like my children. Are you saying you don't like your children, Malcolm?
Take them with you.
Fair enough. I think the other point I was trying to make before we got to this was that, so this your point around like traffic getting screwed up by minor variations. I think we don't really understand traffic. So I only have the headline on this, so please don't take me too deep on this. But Seattle, apparently there was a major road, like the interstate, or I don't know what it was, the coastal multi-layer road thing, and it was going to be traffic apocalypse because they were taking it down. And they took it down, and nothing happened, right? And 90,000 drivers were using that car or that road every day, and magically people could still get around in Seattle with next day. And so there's something weird that happens. People and routing is surprisingly adaptive. So no, my vision for the future is not, is really to spend zero time on the 405, honestly. I've spent that time. It's not fun any time of day, really.
I didn't mean to pick on the 405, by the way. But
oh, come on. If you're going to pick on something, pick on something.
It's a pretty good target.
We are. No, here's the thing. You and I are actually in almost total agreement. I'm simply trying to. The piece of this that strikes me as the most important part is that thing you were saying about the ride sharing and that has to be part of this, and we need to make that plain now. That for this to work the way we want it to work, a couple things have to happen. That not only does Malcolm have to walk away from the fantasy of driving his own vehicle, he also has to walk away from the fantasy of occupying his own vehicle. That if I want to have a quick trip, a seamless movement around urban areas, I have to essentially be willing to get on a high-tech bus.
And I think I don't even think this is a self-driving car thing, right? This is a increased population, increased densification, increased urbanization. The model of mobility that served us so well in the 20th century will not work at the end of the 21st century,
Yeah.
right?
But-
And so
but to
we
your
have
point-
to have technology to help address that.
But to your point, the economics of this
All skew in the right direction.
all skew in favor of making these cars
Yeah.
autonomous. If they're autonomous, we can have a far more flexible and effective system.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's
And isn't that awesome? We have something where we want the social good and the economic kind of thing line up in the right direction. It feels good for that to happen every once in a while. Right? That's exciting.
It's very idealistic. One of the most popular questions Ryan poses here, pilots are trained on how to fly the plane, but also how to react to emergencies, like automated systems going down. So how will driver's ed evolve with self-driving vehicles? I like this question.
a great driver's ed question. I hadn't thought about that. All the driver's ed guys will lose their jobs. Finally, we have an example of lost
Are we going to learn how to drive from the self-driving car?
How will driver's ed evolve with? So I think I will be completely honest. This was not a problem I had thought of, and yet 31 people thought this was awesome.
A great question.
That's great.
32.
33, I think now. So I think that I think it'll evolve, and part of me in the same way like learning how to ride a horse evolved, right? I don't know that there was maybe horse riding ed back in the day, but it moves from being kind of a vocational task, a necessity in urban centers, to one of these things where people enjoy it, they have a passion for it, and they should. Right? Some cars are magnificent and a heck of a lot of fun, and some places to drive at some times of day are awesome too. And so it'll be one of those things you get to do for fun. And it becomes an optional thing that's for people. And, I guess maybe driver ed teachers will then get paid more because it's optional instead of mandatory. That seems the way things work, unfortunately.
Is part of the driver's ed going to be keeping your operating system constantly updated so you're not as vulnerable to hackers, security breaches, things like that?
Well, that's interesting. We replaced driver's ed with Cybersecurity 101.
Yeah.
You learn how to download the latest updates.
As in a Tesla, right? When you update a Tesla.
But if it's what we think is the optimal right outcome here, which is it's a ride-sharing service.
Yeah, it's not you.
Then there's somebody else who's doing that for you, even.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Please.
Oh, please. come on.
Please.
Are you
This
saying,
has been you holding back.
I was gonna say, are you saying why stop now, Malcolm? Why this sudden show of restraint?
Yes.
Only 7 minutes, 45
No,
seconds
but
left.
I just wanted to go back for a moment and to touch on. So I said something to you about 2 minutes ago, which you agreed with. We're both in agreement on it, but I think we should pause and reflect on how unlikely it is to happen.
Uh-oh.
So for this to work appropriately, we have to be comfortable with the fact that in urban areas, we're moving to these kinds of multi-passenger, third-party owned autonomous vehicles. The history of America's relationship with mass transit over the last 50 years suggests that it's very, very hard to get people to accept that way of getting around. Now, it may be the case that this way is so much more efficient and nice and clean and that people will suddenly accept it. But I do think that we need to think about how to better get people. This notion of getting an American driver to share their space with someone they don't know is not easy, right? And if we want to go in that direction, and I think we have to, we got to talk about how can we make it easier for people who never want to ride on a bus, who find the subway. Lots of people find the subway experience disgusting, right? They would never dream of those kinds of people need to get on board with a radically different notion of how they're going to move around a city. How do we convince those people to join in this crusade?
So I don't think you do, right? I guess I look at it through a slightly different lens, right? I think that if you look at New York City, and I'm certainly not an expert in New York City, but my model is that basically, transportation, driving a car sucked so much that people said, we're going to use a taxi, or we're going to use the subway system, or we're going to use the buses, because is, when I kind of optimize for, I want my private space, I want to get there on a reasonable amount of time, I want to pay a reasonable amount of price for it. At some point, that kind of combination of functions netted out that public transit was the right answer. And I think that what will happen, and yet there are some people who do drive their car because for them, it never quite passed the threshold. And there's other people who pay for the luxury of having a private black car or whatever, right? And so I think this is really kind of an economics thing where as we urbanize further, as cities grow denser, more and more people, it will be kind of on the right side of that kind of convenience, cost, and pleasantness, whatever the adjective there is, side of the equation that they say that's the right answer. And we have to provide kind of the catching glove, the technology that will enable them to have an option that isn't sit in traffic for 2 hours a day.
You may have more confidence in human nature than I do. I think people's willingness to persist in suboptimal modes of behavior is stronger than you think.
I think people are self-interested, right? I really do, right? I think you're right that there is a hysteresis, but like there's a point where it like, and maybe this is the pessimist/optimist part of it. It's like I think if you look at kind of the rapidly growing cities in China, getting around those cities sucks so much that they're like. People will jump at a better alternative, right?
Yeah.
They have to, and so I think that the self-interest will kick in at some point. Yes, there is kind of the sunk cost fallacy. Hey, I've got this lease on this car, right, and I'm paying for it, and so I need to kind of write it out. But optimally, the right answer is to eat the $200 a month or $300 a month, and get life back, right? Or at the end of the lease, not. And I think people will behave ultimately rationally around this.
But when you get into a shared vehicle, you have to talk to strangers. And that is socially maybe not what everyone wants to do. But the reason I bring that up is that it's tangentially related here. Malcolm, you have a book coming out, I believe later this year, called Talking to Strangers. How does that fit into, I mean, should we be talking to strangers and making it a more social experience?
That was a very nice segue. Thank you.
I was impressed. That was really...
Thank you. Well, it occurs to me because when you get into a vehicle like that, you want to zone out, and you can do it on a shuttle when you're commuting from San Francisco to Google or something like that. But it is a social experience.
Yeah. No, I don't, truth be told, have a chapter in this book on the new kinds of social interactions that happen with self-driving vehicles. But I do, I will say this, that this is precisely why this issue is so interesting, because as is so often the case with transformative technologies, the technology appears and it forces a whole series of downstream adjustments, social adjustments, political adjustments. I mean, we could go on and on and on. And I've enjoyed this conversation a great deal, and I have enormous respect for what you've done, Chris. And I think that's just really what we've been talking about. You're at one end of you're the person putting in motion this chain of events, but all kinds of other people are going to have to get involved if it's going to work out.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing, that's the conversation I wish we were having now.
Yeah. And I think the good news is that some of that is happening, right? So I spend time talking with our friends in government and the regulators for this and helping them understand, hey, this is why we're doing this is the vision we have, and trying to be honest with them about these are the risks we see, and this is what we're doing to mitigate those risks. And you're absolutely right. Like, one of the things I feel incredibly fortunate is that I get to work on a technology, work in a space that has a profound impact on the world, right? That we can save lives. I believe we will make cities and traffic better. We can give access to more people. And I certainly, and I know my team, take that kind of position with a great deal of responsibility. And so we try to be humble about it. We try to be optimistic about it, because if you aren't, frankly, pack up your bags and go home, right? But we also recognize we need to have a conversation. I really appreciate the chance to have it with you here today and with the audience, right? That's a lot of fun.
Well, with that, Chris Urmson, Malcolm Gladwell, thank you both so much for one of the most fascinating conversations at South by Southwest. And thank you everyone for coming.